In the dim underbelly of Busan's sprawling port district, where the Han River met the salty sprawl of the Yellow Sea, the air hung heavy with the tang of diesel and fish guts. Neon signs flickered in the perpetual twilight, casting erratic shadows on graffiti-scarred warehouses that housed more than just shipments of counterfeit goods. Here, alliances fractured like cheap porcelain, and debts were settled not with words, but with the cold precision of a silenced pistol. It was a world where the Korean syndicates ruled the docks with iron fists wrapped in silk, their operations a labyrinth of smuggling routes, protection rackets, and whispered vendettas against encroaching Chinese triads. Amid this volatile tapestry, an old woman named Mei Ling stumbled through the rain-slicked alleys, her frail body racked by the chill that seeped from the river. She clutched a worn shawl around her shoulders, her steps faltering as she approached the fortified gates of the Black Lotus Club, a nondescript facade hiding the nerve center of Kang Ji-hoon's empire. Mei Ling's daughter, Li Wei, had always been the light in her shadowed life. A sharp-minded accountant in her late 20s, Wei had grown up in the cramped apartments of Incheon's Chinatown, dodging the gangs that preyed on immigrant families like theirs. But debts had a way of catching up, inherited from Wei's late father, a small-time importer who'd crossed the wrong suppliers years ago. Now, with triad enforcers closing in, rumors of a hit list circulating through backroom tea-houses, Mei Ling had no choice. She needed protection, the kind only a man like Kang could provide. Ji-hoon, the Korean Mafia boss known as the Shadow Fox, was a legend in these parts. Ruthless in business, but bound by an unspoken code that spared the innocent if they proved useful. Whispers said he'd once spared a rival's family after they offered loyalty in exchange for sanctuary. Mei Ling prayed it was true. The guards at the club's side entrance eyed her warily as she collapsed against the rusted gate, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Rain drummed on the metal roof overhead, mingling with the distant hum of cargo cranes loading illicit crates onto freighters. On guard, a burly man with a scarred jaw stepped forward, his hand hovering near the holster at his belt. "State your business, Ajuma. This ain't a shelter for strays." Mei Ling lifted her head, her eyes, clouded by age and worry, locking onto his. I must see Kang Ji-hoon. Tell him Mei Ling from the river markets comes begging. It's about a debt, and my daughter." Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath it, forged from decades of scraping by in a foreign land. The guard exchanged a glance with his partner, who murmured into a concealed earpiece. Static crackled, then a curt reply. "Boss says bring her in, but if it's a trick, you'll both regret it." They hauled her through the gate, her feet dragging on the gravel path lined with sodium lamps that buzzed like angry hornets. Inside, the club transformed from seedy dive to opulent lair. Polished mahogany walls absorbed the low thrum of jazz from hidden speakers, and the air carried hints of aged whiskey and cigar smoke. Mei Ling was led down a corridor, flanked by security monitors flickering with feeds from the docks. Grainy images of shadowed figures unloading unmarked vans under the cover of night. In the heart of the building, behind reinforced doors, Kang Ji-hoon sat at a long oak table strewn with ledgers and burner phones. At 42, he was a study in controlled menace. Sharp features etched by old knife scars, his dark suit tailored to conceal the weight of a custom Beretta. His empire spanned shipping manifests doctored to hide arms deals and extortion networks that funneled cash from luxury restaurants to underground casinos. But beneath the veneer, Ji-hoon was haunted by a past loss. His own sister, gunned down in a triad ambush a decade ago, leaving him with a vow: protect the vulnerable, but never let sentiment weaken the chain of command. He looked up as Mei Ling was ushered in, her escort stepping back, but never fully out of reach. "Ji-hoon, she rasped, sinking into a chair unbidden. Her hands trembled as she pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket. Inside, a photo of Wei at a market stall, oblivious to the man in the background snapping the shot with a phone. I can barely stand. The pain in my chest, it's like fire. But take my daughter in. Li Wei, the Triads. They want her for my husband's old debts. 10 million won, they say, or her life. She's clean, smart, works numbers like no one else. She could help you, balance your books, spot the rats in your crew. Please. She's all I have. Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed, scanning the photo. The timestamp was recent, the angle suggesting surveillance from a nearby rooftop. Professional work, not amateur grudge. He recognized the Triad insignia tattooed on the photographer's wrist. The Red Dragon faction, rivals who'd been probing his southern roots for months. A debt like this wasn't random. It was leverage, a way to fracture his alliances in the immigrant communities. He leaned back, the leather chair creaking softly. Why me? You could run to the police or your own people. Mei Ling's laugh was bitter, echoing off the walls. Police? They'd deport us before the ink dried. And my people, though, they're the ones collecting. No, Ji-hoon-si, you have the code. I heard how you shielded that family last year after the warehouse fire. Vows kept, even to outsiders. She pressed a hand to her chest, wincing as a cough rattled through her. The room's air conditioner hummed, carrying the faint metallic scent of the river outside. Ji-hoon drummed his fingers on the table, glancing at a ledger open to a page of discrepancies, small thefts from his dock shipments, possibly an inside job. A woman like Wei, with accounting skills and no ties to his enemies, could be an asset. But trust was a currency he spent sparingly. Where is she now? Hiding in our apartment off the waterfront. But they're watching. Please. Send someone. He nodded to his lieutenant, a wiry man named Park who lingered by the door. Get a team, quiet extraction, no lights, no sirens. As Park slipped out, Ji-hoon met Mei Ling's gaze. If she's as you say, she'll have a place here. But debts don't vanish. They transfer. She works for me now. Mei Ling nodded weakly, relief mingling with fear. Outside, thunder rumbled over the river, and in the monitors, a black SUV idled at the edge of the frame, its plates obscured by mud, but the engine's low growl promising trouble. Had the Triads already moved, or was this just the storm's shadow? As the extraction team rolled out into the night, Ji-hoon wondered if this plea would bind him to a new vulnerability or expose the cracks in his own fortress. The rain-slicked streets of Busan's waterfront gleamed under the sodium glow of street lamps, turning puddles into fractured mirrors that reflected the ceaseless churn of cargo ships beyond the breakwater. Park's extraction team moved like ghosts through the labyrinth of alleyways, their black sedans hugging the shadows to avoid the prying eyes of harbor patrol cameras. The air was thick with the brine of the sea and the acrid bite of exhaust from idling trucks, masking the low rumble of their engines as they approached the weather department block where Li Wei hid. It was a squat, 5-story relic from the post-war boom, its facade scarred by salt corrosion and graffiti tags from rival crews, warnings etched in hasty spray paint that spoke of territories long contested. Inside the lead car, Park gripped the wheel, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, where 2 enforcers checked their suppressed pistols. "Boss wants this clean," he muttered, voice low over the patter of rain on the windshield. "No shots fired, unless the Triads force it. Girls, our ticket to plugging those ledger holes. Can't afford a mess." The discrepancies in Ji-hoon's shipments had been gnawing at him for weeks, missing crates of electronics rerouted through fake manifests, losses that pointed to a mole. If Wei was half as sharp as her mother claimed, she'd sniff it out faster than his own accountants, who were too deep in the pockets of old alliances. They parked a block away, under the overhang of a shuttered fish market that reeked of gutted mackerel left to spoil. One enforcer, a stocky veteran named Kim, with a faded tattoo peeking from his collar, slipped out first, scanning the fire escapes and rooftops. The building's entrance buzzed faintly with the hum of a faulty security light. casting erratic pulses across the lobby's cracked tile floor. No doorman, just a row of dented mailboxes stuffed with overdue notices. Kim nodded to Park, who keyed the door with a cloned fob, pilfered from a routine sweep of the block weeks earlier. Routine until now. Up on the third floor, Li Wei paced the dim confines of her mother's apartment. The walls papered in faded floral patterns that peeled at the edges from years of humidity. The single bulb overhead flickered, throwing her shadow long across the linoleum kitchenette, where a half-eaten bowl of congee sat cold on the counter. She'd arrived hours earlier, after Mei Ling's frantic call from a payphone near the river markets, voice trembling with coughs, begging her to bolt the door and wait for help from the fox. Wei had laughed it off at first, thinking it delirium from her mother's worsening emphysema, but the photo Mei Ling described, the one snapped at the store last week, had chilled her. She'd seen the man with the dragon tattoo lurking near the vegetable crates, his phone angled just so. Not a customer, but a watcher. The debts from her father's botched import deals had haunted them for years, but this felt orchestrated like bait on a hook. A soft knock echoed. 3 raps, pause, 2 more. The signal Mei Ling had whispered. Wei froze, her hand hovering over the kitchen knife on the table, its blade dulled from years of chopping ginger and scallions. "Who?" she called, voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Delivery for Mei Ling," came a muffled reply through the door, laced with a Busan accent. "Open up, miss. Your mother's waiting." She cracked the door, chain still latched, peering at the wiry man in a rain-dampened jacket. His eyes were sharp, assessing, and behind him loomed another figure in the hall's dim light. No uniforms, no badges, just the quiet menace of men who carried authority in their posture. "She's not here," Wei said, but her grip tightened on the knife handle. "What is this really?" Park stepped forward, flashing a glimpse of a laminated ID that looked official enough, forged, of course, from Ji-hoon's network of crooked printers. "Kang Ji-hoon sent us. Your mother's with him now. Triads are closing in. We need to move you before they hit this place." He glanced down the hall, where the elevator dinged softly, empty, but for the echo. "You coming, or do we leave you to the wolves?" Wei hesitated, the weight of her mother's words crashing back. "He has the code, Wei. Loyalty for sanctuary." Financial need clawed at her, bills piling up. Her accounting job at the import firm paying pennies while the threats mounted. And curiosity, sharp as the river's edge. Who was this Kang, that her mother would stake everything on him? She unchained the door, grabbing a worn duffel from the chair. "Fine, but if this is a setup, you'll regret it." They hustled her down the back stairs, the concrete steps slick and echoing under their boots. The air grew heavier with the tang of mold and distant cooking oil from a neighbor's stir-fry. Outside, the sedan waited, engine idling like a predator's breath. Kim took point, scanning the street where a lone bicycle leaned against a lamppost, its chain glinting unnaturally, perhaps rigged with a tracker or just paranoia. As Wei slid into the back seat, Park's phone buzzed. A text from the safe house detail. "Clear on our end, but eyes on the bridge, possible tail." The car peeled away, tires hissing on wet asphalt, weaving through the port's maze of loading docks where cranes groaned like weary giants under the storm clouds. Wei pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching the lights blur into streaks. "What's the catch?" she asked, voice cutting the tension. "My mother said you'd protect us, but nothing's free in this city." Park met her eyes in the mirror, a ghost of a smile. "You work the numbers, spot the leaks in the boss's operations. Triads have been siphoning shipments, fake manifests, ghost accounts. Prove your worth and your family. Cross us." He let it hang, the implication thicker than the fog rolling in from the sea. They hit us straight away along the waterfront esplanade, the Han River churning black and restless to their left, freighters' horns wailing in the distance. Wei's pulse quickened as she spotted headlights in the side mirror, a dark SUV keeping pace 2 cars back, its wipers slashing rhythmically. "That one," she said, pointing. "It's been there since the turn." Kim twisted, hand drifting to his sidearm. "Amateurs, probably Red Dragon scouts." Park accelerated, cutting into a side lane toward the tunnel network under the docks, Ji-hoon's preferred escape routes, lined with hidden access points for quick vanishes. But as they plunged into the concrete moor, the SUV surged forward, closing the gap. A burner phone on the dash crackled to life. Ji-hoon's voice, clipped and urgent. "Abort the direct route. They've got your plates hacked. Reroute to the warehouse district." Wei gripped the seat, the tunnel's fluorescent strips whipping by in a hypnotic blur. Had the triads anticipated this, or was there a leak closer to home? In the rear view, the SUV's grille loomed larger, and a faint glint suggested something more than pursuit, a modified bumper. Perhaps for ramming. The real question burned. How deep did the shadows in Ji-hoon's empire run, and would she survive to uncover them? The tunnel's concrete walls closed in like the jaws of some subterranean beast, the fluorescent light streaking past in relentless pulses that turned the sedan's interior into a staccato nightmare. Li Wei's fingers dug into the leather seat, the material slick under her palms from the rain they'd carried in. The air inside hummed with the growl of the engine and the faint ozone tang of overworked tires gripping the damp asphalt. Park swerved hard into a service lane, the vehicle fishtailing briefly before righting itself, horns blaring from an unseen truck they'd cut off deeper in the network. "They're gaining," Kim barked from the passenger seat, twisting to fire a warning shot out the cracked rear window, muffled by the suppressor, the pop lost in the echo chamber of the tunnel. The pursuing SUV, a sleek black Hyundai with tinted glass, veered closer, its high beams slicing through the gloom like accusatory fingers. Wei caught a glimpse of the driver's silhouette. Broad shoulders, a flash of red ink on his neck, unmistakable triad markings. Her heart hammered, sinking with the rhythmic thud of her own pulse. This wasn't some vague threat from old debts. It was immediate, visceral, the kind of pursuit that left skid marks and regrets. "Call it in," Park snapped, his voice a whip crack over the dashboard's burner phone. Ji-hoon's reply came static-laced. "Shake them at the East Fork. I've got a blocker team en route, 2 vans from the warehouse. But watch your 6. That SUV's got our frequency. Someone's feeding them intel." The words hung heavy, laced with the boss's controlled fury. Wei's mind raced, piecing it together like entries in an unbalanced ledger. Hacked plates meant digital footprints, perhaps a compromised RFID scanner at the port gates, or worse, a ghost in Ji-hoon's own IT crew. She'd seen similar tricks at her old firm, insiders selling access codes for a cut of the skim. The East Fork loomed, a Y-split marked by faded signage and puddles that mirrored the overhead vent's drip. Park yanked the wheel. Tires screeching as they banked left into the narrower branch, used mostly for maintenance crews hauling rusted pipes and forgotten tools. The SUV followed, but hesitated a beat too long, enough for Kim to lean out and clip its front tire with a precise shot. Sparks flew as rubber shredded, the vehicle fishtailing wildly before slamming into the guardrail with a metallic screech that reverberated like thunder. Wei exhaled sharply, the acrid smell of burnt rubber seeping through the vents. But victory was fleeting. As they burst from the tunnel's mouth into the warehouse district, a sprawl of corrugated steel behemoths squatting under sodium floodlights, their sedan lurched. A low rumble vibrated through the chassis, and Park cursed under his breath. "Flat on our side. They must have tagged us back at the apartment, nail strip or tracker spike." He nursed the wheel toward a looming structure, its loading bays yawning open like dark invitations. Chain-link fences rattled in the wind off the river, carrying the distant clank of shipping containers being stacked by automated cranes. They skidded to a halt behind a pallet of sealed crates, the wood splintered and stamped with falsified export labels, electronics bound for nowhere, a front Jihoon used for laundering. Kim and Park hauled Wei out, her duffel slung over one shoulder as they darted toward a side door. The warehouse interior swallowed them, vast and echoing, lit by hanging bulbs that swayed gently, casting long shadows across stacks of pallets and coiled ropes that smelled of tar and salt. Forklifts stood idle, their diesel engines silent, but the air buzzed with the low hum of security cameras pivoting on ceiling mounts. "Stay close," Park whispered, leading them through a maze of narrow aisles. Wei's breath came in measured bursts, her eyes scanning for tells, the subtle glint of a hidden panic button, or the way Park's hand never strayed far from his holster. Gratitude warred with suspicion. These men had pulled her from the fire, but at what price? Her mother's words echoed. She could help you. Balance your books. If Jihoon's operation was bleeding from inside jobs, she could trace the discrepancies, cross-reference manifests against bank wires, spot the behavioral slips like a lieutenant's sudden flush of cash. A door at the far end creaked open before they reached it, revealing two of Jihoon's blockers, stern-faced men in dark jackets, one cradling a shotgun with the casual ease of routine. "Clear path to the safe house," the taller one grunted. "Boss is en route. Triads hit a decoy van on the bridge. Bought us time." But as they moved toward a waiting panel van, Wei's foot caught on something, a loose floor grate partially ajar. She knelt instinctively, prying it up to reveal a small, discarded burner phone, its screen cracked but glowing with a recent text. "Target acquired. Extraction at Warehouse 7. Confirm mole status." Park snatched it, his face tightening. "This shouldn't be here. One of ours?" The implications sliced the air. Betrayal from within, a guard rotation compromised, or a ledger clerk turning coat for triad bribes. Wei met his gaze, the pieces clicking. "Show me your shipping logs. I can verify the routes, cross-check against this timestamp. If there's a pattern, it'll point to the leak." He hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Prove it in the safe house. Boss decides if you're in deep." They piled into the van, the doors slamming shut as it rumbled to life, weaving through the district's back lots where fog from the river clung like a shroud. Jihoon's world was pulling her in, a web of loyalty and shadows. But the phone's message burned in her mind. Who was the mole, and how close were they to striking again? Outside, as the van merged onto a shadowed access road, a lone figure watched from the warehouse roof. A silhouette against the storm clouds, phone to ear, murmuring coordinates that promised the night was far from over. If you're enjoying this story so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The safe house perched on the outskirts of Busan's warehouse district, a nondescript two-story brick building masquerading as an abandoned storage depot, its windows boarded with plywood that creaked under the relentless assault of wind whipping off the yellow sea. The van's tires crunched over gravel as it pulled into the overgrown lot, the engine cutting off with a sigh that left only the distant roar of waves crashing against the breakwater and the faint patter of lingering rain on the corrugated roof. Li Wei stepped out first, the chill air nipping at her damp clothes, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth and rusted metal. Sodium floodlights from a nearby dock cast elongated shadows across the yard, turning chain-link fences into skeletal guardians that rattled softly in the gusts. Park led the way, his flashlight beam slicing through the gloom to reveal a reinforced steel door half hidden behind a stack of weathered shipping barrels. He punched in a code on a concealed keypad. 4 digits, Wei noted. Simple enough to memorize, but likely rotated by the hour, and the lock disengaged with a mechanical click. Inside, the space unfolded into a utilitarian haven. Exposed brick walls lined with locked cabinets, a long conference table scarred from years of urgent meetings, and a kitchenette where a coffee pot gurgled faintly, filling the air with the bitter aroma of overbrewed grounds. Overhead, fluorescent strips hummed to life, illuminating banks of monitors displaying feeds from perimeter cameras, grainy views of empty alleys and the river's dark expanse. "Secure the perimeter!" Park ordered his men, who fanned out like well-oiled parts of a machine, one checking the back exit while another swept for bugs with a handheld scanner that beeped rhythmically. We dropped her duffel on a worn couch, her muscles aching from the adrenaline crash, but her mind raced ahead. The burner phone from the warehouse grate weighed heavy in her pocket, its cracked screen a silent accusation. She pulled it out, thumbing through the sparse message history, coordinates matching their escape route, and that damning phrase, "confirm mole status." Timestamps aligned with the tunnel pursuit. Whoever owned this had real-time intel. Before she could delve deeper, the front door swung open again, admitting a rush of cool air and the figure of Kang Ji-hoon himself. He moved with predatory grace, his dark overcoat shedding droplets like forgotten worries, flanked by two lieutenants who scanned the room with practiced efficiency. At 42, Ji-hoon carried the weight of his empire in the lines around his eyes, sharp, unyielding, tempered by the scar that traced his jaw like a map of old battles. He shrugged off the coat, revealing a crisp shirt rolled to the elbows, forearms corded with tension. The air shifted with his presence, charged like the moments before a storm breaks. "You made it," he said, voice low and measured, locking eyes with Wei across the room. There was no warmth, only assessment, as if she were a ledger entry to be verified. "Your mother's stable at the clinic, emphysema flare-up, but she'll pull through. Park says you spotted the tail early. Useful." Wei straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching, though her pulse quickened at the proximity. Gratitude flickered, but so did wariness. This man held her fate like a card up his sleeve. It wasn't hard. The SUV matched the description from the photo my mother showed you. Red Dragon ink on the driver. She held up the burner phone, the screen's glow casting eerie shadows on her face. "This was in the warehouse, your warehouse. Someone selling you out." Ji-hoon's expression hardened, a muscle ticking in his jaw as he took the device, scrolling through the messages with a thumb that betrayed no surprise, only grim confirmation. The room's hum seemed to fade, leaving the tick of a wall clock and the muffled drip from a leaky faucet. "We've had leaks before, small ones, rerouted shipments, padded invoices, but this—" He pocketed the phone, turning to Park. "Run the serial against our inventory. If it's from our stock, heads roll." Park nodded, already pulling a laptop from a cabinet, its keys clicking rapidly as he cross-referenced. Wei watched, her accountant's instincts kicking in. "Let me see the manifests. The ones from the last quarter. Timestamps like this don't lie. If there's a pattern in the discrepancies, it'll show who touched the roots." "Boom!" Ji-hoon studied her, the silence stretching taut as a tripwire. Possession stirred in his chest, unbidden, a need to shield this woman who'd stumbled into his web, her sharp mind a mirror to his own calculated risks. But autonomy was her armor. He saw it in the set of her shoulders, the way she didn't back down. His code demanded loyalty, not coercion, yet the triad's shadow loomed, threatening to drag her under. "You don't owe me yet," he said finally, sliding an encrypted tablet across the table. "But if you find something, it buys your mother's peace, and yours." She took it, fingers brushing the cool glass, the interface blooming with columns of data, shipping logs laced with subtle anomalies, crates logged as textiles but valued at electronics rates, guard rotations overlapping with unexplained delays. The air grew thicker with the scent of stale takeout from an earlier meal, containers piled in the corner. As Wei scrolled, A entry jumped out. A van transfer on the night of the extraction, signed off by a mid-level enforcer named Choi. Park's second, she'd learned during the drive. The timestamp matched the burner's alert. "Here," she said, voice steady but laced with unease. "Choi authorized a detour through the East Fork, but your logs show the tunnel was clear. No maintenance. He fed them our path." Park's face paled, his scanner beeping, forgotten in his hand. Ji-hoon leaned over the table, the wood groaning under his weight, his breath warm against the chill. Betrayal cut deep. A fracture in the family he'd forged from the ashes of his sister's death, a vow to protect, now poisoned. "Choi's been with us 5 years. Solid, or so I thought." He straightened, signaling to a lieutenant. "Bring him in, quietly." Tension coiled like smoke from the coffee pot, the monitors flickering with a new feed, headlights approaching the perimeter fence, too deliberate for a patrol. His stomach twisted. Had Choi anticipated this? Outside, thunder grumbled over the river, and the first fat drops of renewed rain hammered the roof, drowning the crunch of gravel under tires that pulled up unannounced. Was this extraction, or the mole closing the noose? Ji-hoon drew his Beretta with fluid motion, the slide's click echoing like a promise of reckoning, but his eyes stayed on Wei, a silent pledge amid the gathering storm. In his world, trust was earned in blood and numbers, and she was already rewriting the balance. The rain lashed the safe house roof like a barrage of accusations, each drop amplifying the thunder's growl that rolled in from the river. Inside, the air thickened with the sharp tang of gun oil and cooling coffee, the monitor's glow casting Ji-hoon's face in stark blues and greys as he positioned himself by the boarded window. Li Wei stood frozen at the table, the tablet's screen still open to the damning manifest entry. Choi's signature a digital scar amid the columns of numbers. Her fingers itched to trace more patterns, to unravel the web of falsified roots that snaked through Ji-hoon's empire like hidden veins. But the crunch of tires on gravel snapped her back. The approaching vehicle wasn't a friendly patrol. Its headlights pierced the perimeter feed, sweeping the lot in deliberate arcs, engine idling low as if savoring the approach. 2 men. "Unmarked sedan," the lieutenant by the monitors muttered, his voice a gravel whisper over the scanner's persistent beep. No response on the radio. Could be Choi's play, drawing heat while he slips the net. Park moved like a shadow to the back door, checking the bolt with a quiet click, his earlier pallor replaced by the hard lines of a man bracing for fallout. Ji-hoon didn't flinch, his Beretta steady in a two-handed grip, the barrel an extension of his resolve. His code burned in him, protect the chain, excise the rot without mercy. But Wei's presence complicated it, a civilian thread in his tapestry of steel, her autonomy clashing with the possessive urge to shield her from the storm he'd unwittingly unleashed. "Stay down," Ji-hoon said to her, eyes flicking from the feed to her face. A silent command laced with something deeper, unspoken. Gratitude? No, more like the raw edge of vulnerability, the kind that had cost him his sister years ago when a mole's whisper led to that ambush in the docks. Wei nodded, dropping behind the table, her duffel clutched like a shield. Curiosity warred with fear. She'd stepped into this for her mother's sake, for the financial lifeline that balanced the debts, but now it pulled at her ethics. Uncovering betrayals meant wading into moral grey, where loyalty to strangers blurred into survival. The headlights swung closer, the sedan's silhouette resolving on the outer camera. A compact Kia, plates muddied but familiar, registered to one of the warehouse crews, per the tablet's ancillary logs she'd glimpsed. The doors opened, and 2 figures emerged, rain sheeting off their hoods. One raised a hand in what might have been a signal, the other scanned the building with a handheld device that glinted under the floodlights. A signal jammer, Wei realized, the kind used to black out security bands during hits. Her mind raced. If Choi had tipped them, this was no random probe. It was coordinated. tying back to the Red Dragon's push on the southern routes, using immigrant debts as wedges to fracture Ji-hoon's hold on the port communities. Park's voice cut the tension from the back. No breach yet, but the fence cam's glitching, jamming our signal. Ji-hoon holstered his weapon with deliberate calm, signaling the lieutenant to arm the silent alarm, a low-frequency pulse that would summon the blocker team from the warehouse district without alerting outsiders. Let them knock. If it's Choi, we take him alive. Need to know how deep the Triad's hooks are. The words hung, revealing the push-pull of his world, ruthless efficiency tempered by the need for intel, a code that spared sources until they broke. A heavy fist pounded the steel door, the echo reverberating through the brick like a heartbeat. Boss, it's Min from the East Dock. Heard about the tunnel mess, came to reinforce. The voice was thick with a feigned Busan drawl, but Wei caught the slip. Too eager, the cadence off from the enforcers she'd overheard earlier. She crept to the table's edge, peering at the monitors. The second man lingered by the sedan, hand in his jacket, likely palming a burner to relay positions. Behavioral tells, she'd call it in an audit. Mismatched alibis, the subtle hunch of a liar under pressure. Ji-hoon crossed to the door, his steps measured, the floorboards creaking softly under his weight. State your business clear, Min. Perimeter's hot. No unannounced visits. Through the peephole feed, the man's face twisted, rain streaking his features, a faint scar above his eye that didn't match any crew photos she'd scanned mentally from the tablet. The reply came muffled. Choi sent me. Said the girl's a liability. Triads want her bad. We're pulling you out the back. The lie landed like a dud grenade, but it confirmed the fracture. Choi wasn't just leaking, he was directing the strike, turning Ji-hoon's own men against the sanctuary. Wei's stomach knotted. Autonomy felt like a luxury now, her independence traded for this web of suspicion. She rose slightly, whispering to Park across the room. Check the sedan's plates against the logs. If it's warehouse issued, the VIN will show modifications, Triad upgrades for ramming. Park nodded, fingers flying over the laptop, the screen's glow illuminating his tense jaw. A match pinged. The vehicle had been scrapped 2 weeks prior, per records, but resurfaced in a ghost manifest rerouted through a Red Dragon front in Incheon. It's a plant. Choi's covering tracks, probably paid off half the garage crew. Outside, the pounding intensified, joined by the scrape of metal, prying at the doorframe with a tool that whined against the reinforcements. Ji-hoon's hand returned to his Beretta, the slide racking with a soft snick. Enough games. He triggered the outer lights, floodlights blazing to life and pinning the intruders in harsh white, their shadows stretching long across the gravel. The Min figure recoiled, cursing in Mandarin-laced Korean, a dead giveaway for Triad infiltration. Shots cracked from the sedan, muffled pops that shattered a perimeter camera, glass tinkling like brittle ice. Chaos erupted. Park and the lieutenant returned fire through slits in the boards, the acrid bite of cordite filling the room as bullets thudded into the brick exterior. Wei ducked, heart slamming, the tablet skittering across the floor to reveal another clue. A string of texts in Choi's personnel file, deleted but recoverable, coordinates to the safe house, time-stamped hours ago. Betrayal's cost was immediate, the air humming with the whine of ricochets and the distant wail of an approaching convoy. Ji-hoon's blockers, cutting through the storm. Ji-hoon grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back exit, with a grip firm but not bruising, his voice low amid the din. We move now. Trust me on this. His eyes held hers, a flicker of the personal code shining through, protection not as ownership, but as a vow forged in shared peril. Wei nodded, snatching the tablet as they bolted into the rain-slashed night. The safe house's door slamming behind them like a final judgment, But as the blocker vans screeched into the lot, guns blazing to scatter the attackers, a new shadow detached from the sedan's flank. A third figure slipping toward the river path, phone glowing with a message that read, "Extraction failed. Initiate phase 2 on the boss's convoy." Who was pulling Choi's strings? And how many more ghosts lurked in the ledgers waiting to strike? The rain hammered the convoy like a vengeful tide, turning the access road into a slick ribbon of blacktop that snaked through Busan's fog-shrouded industrial fringe. Ji-hoon's blocker vans led the charge, 3 armored Mercedes, engines roaring in unison, their headlights carving tunnels through the downpour that sheeted off the river to their right. Li Wei huddled in the middle vehicle, wedged between Ji-hoon and a stone-faced lieutenant named Ryu. The tablet clutched to her chest like a talisman. The air inside reeked of wet leather and the metallic tang of spent casings from the safe-house skirmish. The dashboard vents blasting hot air that did little to chase the chill seeping through the reinforced glass. Her pulse thrummed in sync with the wiper's frantic rhythm, each swipe revealing glimpses of the Han River's churning black surface, freighters' lights winking like distant warnings. Ji-hoon gripped the handhold above the door, his Beretta holstered but within easy reach, eyes fixed on the lead van's taillights ahead. The escape had been textbook, blockers flushing the attackers, scattering them into the storm, but that third figure's shadow lingered in his mind. A ghost dispatched with a phone's glow. Phase 2 on the convoy? It reeked of escalation, the Red Dragon's playbook. Probe weak points, then hit the artery. His code demanded he shield Wei, this outsider who'd pierced his armor with her unyielding gaze, but autonomy gnawed at him. She wasn't cargo to be secured, yet the possessive pull tightened with every mile. "Ryu, eyes on the flanks," he ordered, voice cutting the hum of tires on wet asphalt. "No stragglers from the warehouse district." Ryu nodded, scanning the side mirrors where shadows danced under sodium lamps lining the docks. "Clear for now, boss. But the jammer they used, it's military grade, not street trash. Choi must have sourced it from their Incheon suppliers." The lieutenant's words hung heavy, laced with the fear of deeper rot. Wei shifted, the tablet's edge digging into her ribs, her mind sifting the data like sand for gold. The recoverable texts in Choi's file weren't isolated. Cross-referenced against shipping manifests, they formed a pattern: diversions timed to low-guard rotations, funds siphoned into offshore accounts masked as maintenance fees. Behavioral tells screamed Choi's sudden purchase of a luxury watch last month, logged in a discreet ledger she'd glimpsed, mismatched his salary. But who pulled his strings? A rival lieutenant or a triad mole embedded higher? "Show me the convoy route," Wei said, breaking the silence, her voice steady despite the knot of suspicion in her gut. Loyalty to her mother had dragged her here, but ethics clashed. Uncovering this meant complicity in Ji-hoon's world, where debts transferred like heirlooms. Ji-hoon glanced at her, a flicker of approval in his eyes, tempered by the wariness of a man who'd lost too much to trust. He pulled a folded map from the glove compartment, its creases worn from countless drills, spreading it across their laps under the dim cabin light. Red lines traced the path, through the tunnel network to a secondary safe house in the hills, bypassing the main bridges where cameras fed into police nets. "Here," she pointed, tracing a junction near the old shipyards. "Your logs show extra patrols on this stretch, but Choi rerouted a supply van through it last week. Same timestamp as one of his texts. If Phase 2's a setup, they'll hit the merge point, ambush with blockers of their own." The words tasted like betrayal's echo, her independence fracturing under the weight of shared peril. Ji-hoon studied the map, his finger hovering over the spot, the cabin's heat amplifying the faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood and steel grounding amid the chaos. "Smart," he murmured, the praise low but genuine, stirring that push-pull in him. Draw her close for protection, yet respect the fire that made her invaluable. Radio the lead, Titan formation, no gaps. Ryu keyed the mic, static crackling before the lead van acknowledged, its speed ticking up. But as they approached the merge, the storm's fury peaked. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating a blackout ahead, the junction's lights dead, sodium glow snuffed like a jammed circuit. Not natural. Ji-hoon recognized the signs. A stage diversion from cut power lines, common triad trick to blind surveillance. The convoy slowed, engines growling as they nosed into the dark stretch. The river's roar, now a thunderous companion. Wei's breath caught. A flicker in the rear view, headlights materializing from a side alley, too precise for coincidence. "Tail!" Ryu barked, flooring it as the pursuing vehicles, 2 SUVs, black as the night, surged forward, closing with predatory intent. Gunfire erupted, muffled pops stitching the air, bullets pinging off the Mercedes' armored flanks like hail on tin. Ji-hoon shoved Wei down, his body a shield, the jolt of contact electric amid the adrenaline. "Stay low, Ryu, lose them in the yards." The lieutenant veered sharply onto a service road flanking the shipyards, gravel spitting under the tires as massive cranes loomed like silent sentinels, their hooks swaying in the wind. The air filled with the brine of the sea and the acrid bite of exhaust, the convoy weaving through rusted hulks of half-loaded freighters where shadows hid potential snipers. Wei's mind raced, piecing clues. The blackout aligned with a manifest anomaly. A power upgrade bid, awarded to a shell company tied to Choi's offshore wire. Human error? No. Deliberate sabotage, institutional limits exploited by bribes to the grid crew. One SUV rammed the trail van, metal screeching in a shower of sparks, the impact shuddering through the line. Shouts crackled over the radio. "We're hit! Taking fire!" Ji-hoon grabbed the wheel from Ryu for a brutal evasive, slinging them around a container stack, the tablet tumbling to the floor. Wei snatched it, scrolling frantically under the seat. Another hit. Access codes for the yard's gates, logged under Choi's alias, granting the triad's entry points. "It's him," she gasped, voice rising over the din. Choi disabled the lights, fed them the convoy path. But the bids... There's a name above him, Lee from accounting, your own crew. He's the ghost. Ji-hoon's jaw clenched, betrayal's sting sharper than the ricochets, his vow to protect the innocent now a fractured shield. Lee's name surfaced in flashes, a quiet enforcer privy to ledgers, his loyalty unquestioned until now. The middle van fish-tailed as another barrage clipped the bumper, flames licking from the engine, a staged fire from incendiary rounds, turning the escape hazardous. Smoke billowed, acrid and choking, forcing the convoy to split. Lead van peeling toward the hills, theirs diving deeper into the yards, where fog from the river cloaked the stacks. They burst through a chain-link gap, codes bypassed, thanks to Wei's quick hack on the tablet's interface, skidding onto a loading pier where the yellow sea stretched endless, waves crashing against concrete pilings that groaned under the assault. The pursuing SUVs faltered in the smoke, but one broke free. Grill looming in the mirrors, Ji-hoon floored it toward a waiting extraction boat at the dock's end, its diesel engine idling with a low thrum. Lights doused. "Get us aboard," he ordered, helping Wei to her feet as Ryu laid cover fire, the pops echoing off the water. They abandoned the van in a screeching halt, leaping onto the deck slick with rain, the boat surging away as bullets skipped across the waves. Ji-hoon pulled Wei below decks into the dim cabin, the hull vibrating with the engine's strain, salt spray stinging through portholes. His hand lingered on her arm, the touch a silent anchor, possessiveness yielding to mutual reliance, forged in the night's crucible. "You saved us back there," he said, voice rough over the storm's howl. "Lee's the head, Choi's puppet, will gut the operation at dawn." Wei met his eyes, the tablet's glow illuminating the resolve in hers, fear yielding to the bond of shared secrets. But as the boat cut through the chop toward a hidden cove, a burner in Ryu's pocket buzzed, an intercepted message from the lead van. Ambush at the hills. Lee's coordinating. More inbound. The true architect wasn't just a mole, it was a faction war reignited, and with the convoy fractured. Who would reach the secondary safe house first? Loyalty's remnants or the Triad's closing jaws? If this tale already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more hidden stories to light. The boat sliced through the yellow sea's churning black waves like a blade tempered in fury. Its diesel engine a relentless growl that battled the storm's roar. Salt spray lashed the portholes, blurring the horizon where Busan's sodium-lit skyline faded into a smear of neon and shadow. Below decks, in the cramped cabin lit by a single red emergency bulb, Li Wei braced against the bulkhead, the tablet screen casting flickering data across her face. The air hung heavy with the brine of the ocean and the faint, oily residue from the engine, vibrating through the wooden planks underfoot. Her clothes clung damp and cold, but the chill in her bones came from the intercepted message, ambush at the hills, Li's name stamped like a counterfeit seal on every turn. Kang Ji-hoon stood at the narrow chart table, his broad shoulders blocking the dim light as he pored over a nautical map pinned with rusted tacks. Water dripped from his hair, tracing rivulets down the scar on his jaw, but his focus was iron, eyes scanning routes that snaked toward the hidden cove on the city's eastern fringe. Ryu hovered nearby, burner phone in hand, his face etched with the strain of fractured loyalty. The lead van signal had gone dark minutes ago. Swallowed by the storm or something sharper, Ji-hoon's code twisted in him like a knife. Protect the family. But how when the family bled traitors? Wei's insight had saved them once, her autonomy a spark that ignited his guarded trust, yet possessiveness clawed at the edges. He couldn't lose another to the shadows, not when her presence stirred echoes of the sister he'd failed. Li's not just a puppet, Wei said, her voice cutting the engine's hum, steady despite the boat's pitch. She tapped the tablet, pulling up a cross-referenced ledger from the convoy's encrypted drive. Wire transfers, masked as supplier rebates, funneled through a shell in Vladivostok. Look at the timestamps. Choi's diversions fed into Li's approvals, but the end recipient is a red dragon front, old ties from your sister's ambush. He's not selling for cash, it's revenge. Someone in the Triads promised him payback for a grudge you don't even remember. Ji-hoon straightened, his gaze locking onto hers, the red light deepening the intensity in his eyes. The cabin rocked violently, a wave slamming the hull with a thud that rattled the portholes. He leaned closer, the map crinkling under his palm. Close enough that she caught the faint scent of rain-soaked wool and gunpowder. Revenge? Li's been clean since I pulled him from the streets a decade ago. If it's tied to her... His voice trailed, the past loss a raw edge, shaping choices that blurred the line between code and compulsion. Loyalty versus suspicion warred in him. Wei's ethics challenged his world, pushing for truth over expedience, yet fear of exposure, of dragging her deeper, held him back. Ryu's phone buzzed again, the vibration sharp against the wood. He glanced at the screen, face paling. Boss, it's from the Hill safe house. Partial transmission. Compromised. Li's men inside. Convoy hit. Survivors pinned. Static swallowed the rest, but the implication landed like a depth charge. The secondary bolt hole, meant as their final sanctuary, was a trap sprung. Ji-hoon cursed under his breath, slamming a fist on the table, the tacks scattering like fleeing rats. The boat lurched, foam boiling past the glass as the captain, a grizzled fisherman from Ji-hoon's outer network, shouted from the wheelhouse about crosswinds pushing them off course. "We can't dock there," Ji-hoon said, mind racing through logistics, the cove's access codes, guard rotations he'd drilled into his crew, now potentially sold. Reroute to the old lighthouse pier, abandoned since the 90s quake. No cameras, natural cover from the cliffs. But even as he spoke, doubt flickered. Human error in the storm could beach them, or worse. Institutional limits, Coast Guard patrols jammed by triad bribes, could box them in. Way's fingers flew over the tablet, cross-checking against a cached manifest of coastal routes. A clue emerged. A maintenance log for the lighthouse, signed off by Lee 2 days prior, with a note on structural reinforcements, code for rigged explosives or sniper nests. Subtle behavioral tells hidden in plain sight. "You're right about the grudge," she pressed, standing despite the sway, her independence a quiet defiance that drew him in. "The Vladivostok shells match shipments from the night your sister died. Arms rerouted, but Lee was on perimeter that shift. He lost a brother in the crossfire, blamed you. The Triads just handed him the match." Her words hung. A partial discovery that cracked the facade. The threat wasn't random debt collection. It was organized vendetta, using Mei Ling's plea as the spark to ignite old fractures. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened, the possessive urge surging. He wanted to pull her close, shield her from the fallout, but her gaze demanded partnership, autonomy over ownership. The boat shuddered as it rounded a jagged outcrop, the lighthouse's silhouette emerging through the sheets of rain, a skeletal tower on a rocky promontory. Its beam long dark, waves crashing against barnacle-crusted pilings that groaned like weary bones. Ryu relayed the change to any surviving outriders, but the radio spat only static, surveillance jammed or towers toppled by the gale. As they neared the pier, a decrepit stretch of weathered concrete jutting into the froth, headlights pierced the fog from the cliff road above, sweeping the water in predatory arcs. Not Coast Guard, too low-slung, the growl of engines carrying over the wind. "Ambush!" Ryu hissed, drawing his sidearm. The captain killed the engine, momentum carrying them silently toward the dock. But the pursuing vehicles, 2 jeeps, tires churning mud, skidded to a halt overlooking the pier, figures deploying with the efficiency of drilled enforcers. Spotlights pinned the boat, rain turning the beams into shimmering veils, and muffled shouts echoed. Mandarin commands laced with Korean, Red Dragon accents confirming the infiltration. Bullets skipped across the waves, stitching foam near the bow, forcing the crew to dive for cover. Ji-hoon grabbed Wei's arm, hauling her toward the aft hatch as the boat ground against the pilings with a splintering crunch. "We go over the side. Climb the rocks to the service path. Ryu, cover us." The lieutenant nodded, laying down suppressing fire through a gun port, the pops lost in the storm's fury. They leaped into the shallows, icy water shocking Wei's lungs as she waded ashore, rocks slicing her palms. Ji-hoon was beside her, his grip steadying without dominating, the two of them scrambling up the slick cliff face where handholds crumbled under pressure. Natural hazards amplified by the blackout, no ropes or lights to ease the ascent. At the top, they crested the ridge, breaths ragged. The jeep's engines revving closer along the narrow track. Wei spotted a glint in the underbrush, a discarded access fob, Lee's initials etched faintly, dropped in haste. He was here, scouting. The lighthouse isn't abandoned, it's their fallback. But as they sprinted toward the tree line, a flare arced overhead from one of the vehicles, illuminating the path in crimson glow, revealing tripwires strung low across the trail. Lee's handiwork, a botched infiltration turned deadly snare. Ji-hoon shoved her aside just as her foot brushed one, the wire snapping taut with a metallic twang that promised explosion or alarm. They tumbled into the brush, hearts pounding, the Triad's shadows closing in from the road. With the cove compromised and the convoy shattered, who held the true leverage now? Ji-hoon's remnants, or the mole's final play in the gathering dark? The brush tore at Li Wei's clothes like vengeful fingers, thorns snagging her sleeves as she and Kang Ji-hoon scrambled deeper into the tree line, the metallic twang of the tripped wire still echoing in her ears. Rain pelted the canopy above, turning the undergrowth into a slick morass of mud and fallen leaves that squelched underfoot. the air thick with the earthy rot of sodden soil and the briny whip of sea spray from the cliff below. Her palms burned from the rocks, shallow cuts stinging with each desperate grab for purchase, but adrenaline drowned the pain, fueled by the crunch of boots on the ridge path behind them. The Triad enforcer's shouts slicing through the storm like muffled thunder. Jihoon pulled her behind a gnarled pine, its bark rough and resinous under her back, his body a barrier against the shadows closing in. His breath came steady, controlled, but his eyes, dark pools reflecting the flare's dying crimson, betrayed the storm within. Loyalty fractured by Lee's betrayal. The code that bound him now a chain, dragging them both toward exposure. "The lighthouse," he whispered, voice low over the wind's howl, pointing to the tower's silhouette looming through the trees, its base shrouded in fog rolling off the waves. Lee's fallback rigged, but it has an old service tunnel, exits to the coastal road. If we reach it, Ryu's boat can circle back. Wei nodded, her mind racing through the tablet's cached data clutched in her free hand, screen smeared with rain, but glowing with one final clue. A blueprint overlay from the maintenance log showing the tunnel's access code, Lee's sloppy reuse of his sister's death date, a behavioral tell born of grudge-fueled haste. Autonomy surged in her. This wasn't just survival, it was reckoning. Her ethics aligning with Jihoon's code in a fragile alliance. But fear clawed, possessiveness in his grip, protective yet respecting her fire, pulled at the threads of independence she'd clung to amid the debts and threats. "The tripwires are motion-linked," she said, tracing the path with her eyes. "We go low, parallel the cliff. But if Lee's inside, it's a kill box." He squeezed her hand once, a silent vow amid the chaos. Then they moved, crouched and silent, weaving through ferns that slapped wet against their legs, the distant crack of branches signaling the pursuer's advance. Gunfire stitched the night, bullets whipping through the trees with sharp cracks, splintering bark inches from Wei's shoulder. One grazed Jihoon's arm, tearing fabric and drawing a thin line of blood that bloomed dark on his sleeve, the coppery scent mingling with the pine. He grunted but didn't falter, pushing her ahead toward the lighthouse's base, where rusted iron stairs spiraled up from the rocky outcrop, waves crashing below like a natural moat turned hazardous. They hit the door, a heavy steel slab etched with corrosion, its keypad glinting faintly under a jury-rigged floodlight that flickered with the storm's interference. Jihoon punched in the code from her whisper, the lock disengaging with a hydraulic hiss that cut through the gale. Inside, the air shifted to stale dampness, the tunnel's concrete walls dripping condensation that echoed their footsteps like accusatory drips. Dim emergency strips hummed to life along the floor, casting long shadows that danced with the sway of the structure above. The space narrowed, lined with forgotten electrical conduits and puddles that reflected their tense faces. Jihoon's scarred jaw set, Wei's eyes sharp with the push-pull of trust and suspicion. Voices echoed from ahead, Korean laced with Mandarin, the clink of metal suggesting weapons drawn. Lee. They pressed against the wall, the cold seeping through their clothes, as two figures rounded a bend. Lee in the lead, wiry and hollow-eyed, his face twisted in the low light, flanked by a Triad enforcer with a suppressed pistol. The grudge etched him like the scar on Jihoon's jaw, a decade's rot from that dockside ambush, where Lee's brother fell in the crossfire, blame pinned on Jihoon for the rout that night. "You took everything," Lee spat, spotting them, his voice echoing off the concrete. "The Triads gave it back. Your shipments, your routes. The old woman's plea was perfect bait. Now, end it." Jihoon stepped forward, Beretta drawn in a fluid motion, the slides click sharp as a verdict. "My code spared you then. Doesn't now." Tension coiled, the air humming with the distant generator's thrum and the enforcer's ragged breaths. Wei's heart hammered, but she moved instinctively, flinging a loose conduit pipe with a clang that distracted the Triad man, buying Ji-hoon the beat he needed. Shots rang out, muffled in the tunnel. Lee's bullet clipped the wall near Wei's head, concrete dust stinging her eyes. But Ji-hoon's found its mark, dropping the enforcer with a thud. Lee lunged, knife flashing, but Wei's tablet case swung like a club, cracked against his wrist, the blade skittering away. Ji-hoon grappled him down, the struggle a blur of grunts and scuffles on the slick floor, ending with Lee's arm pinned, face pressed to the cold stone. "The Red Dragon's play," Lee gasped, blood trickling from a split lip. "They promised the port if I delivered you. Phase 2 was the convoy, explosives on the Hills van. Your lead team's gone." The revelation landed like the waves outside, the threat organized, a vendetta woven into logistics, bribed guards, hacked manifests, staged blackouts, all credible chains of human greed and old wounds. Victory's cost etched in. The lead van survivors sacrificed, Ji-hoon's arm bandaged hastily with Wei's scarf, exposure rippling through his empire as word of the mole spread. Ryu's voice crackled over a salvaged radio from the fallen enforcer. "Boat inbound, cliff extraction in 2. They bound Lee with conduit wire, leaving him for the arriving blockers, and burst from the tunnel's far end onto the coastal road, where the boat idled against a hidden jetty, engine purring low. As they boarded, the storm easing to a drizzle that patted the deck, Ji-hoon turned to Wei, the sea's salt mingling with the relief in his eyes. "You didn't just balance the books, you saved the chain. Stay, not as debt but choice, protection, trust. Us." She met his gaze, the push-pull resolving into quiet commitment, the true treasure, a future forged in shared peril, his code now hers. Loyalty over power, family chosen amid the shadows. The boat pulled away, Busan's lights a distant promise, the adventure's scars a map of transformation. In the quiet aftermath, as dawn broke over the river, Mei Ling waited at the clinic, her cough eased, eyes lighting at their return. The empire mended, moles excised through discreet arrests and rerouted alliances, but what lingered wasn't the spoils of control. It was the memory of that night, the bonds unbreakable, loyalty and found family outlasting the raw edge of power. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of loyalty, danger, and found family. See you in the next story.